So Landon, I asked Landon, our topic for tonight is the goodness of God. We're in our head, heart, hands series. So I asked Landon to share just a brief testimony of where he's seen God's goodness in his life. So give Landon your full attention, then I'll come up, or actually JJ is going to come up following that and overview our topic, all right?
Sounds good. I get the mic. Okay,
You
cool.
get the mic.
All right, raise of hands, who here has a job, whether it's your own business or you work somewhere? Raise your hand. All right, cool. How many of you, if that job was just, keep your hands up. How many of you, if that job was just taken away, would think this is a good thing? Okay, so there's still a few of you. That's a few of you. It took me, okay, so good. That's good and bad. It took me about 4 times of my job being taken away from me to get to that place where I said, okay, this is going to be okay. This is going to be good. So to tell you as a story of God's goodness, so I am an adult who has a family and children who require me to have a job to pay for things like food, the bills and all of that. And after I had my first son, about 1 to 2 weeks after I had my first son, I had my first instance of a job saying, hey, we don't need you anymore. We'll see you later. And I said, oh, this is not good. This is not good at all. But I was very lucky. In a few weeks, about a month later, I got another job, and it was okay. And then I had that job for about 6 months. And then my wife and I found out we were going to have our second child, my beautiful daughter, Ada. And I was over the moon because I had a job. I had stability. And then about 2 weeks before my daughter Ada was born, that job said, hey, we don't need you anymore. Here's 2 weeks. And I said, I'm having a child in 2 weeks. And they said, not our problem. So that happened. And then my daughter was born. I didn't have a job. I got a new job about 2 months later. It was okay. Things were settling down. Things were going well. And then about a year later, that job said, hey, we don't like you very much. We're going to see you later. And I said, oh, this is not my jam. God, what is happening? And about that time, I was also having kind of like an early to like very early midlife crisis. And so I decided, you know what, I'm just going to start doing something completely different. The job that I have is not my jam at all. I don't like the industry. This is no good. The Lord clearly doesn't like this job for me, and I'm going to move on. So I took about 6 months, and right before my third child was born, I got my next job. Had that job for 3 years, and I could finally say, the Lord is good. The Lord is good to me. He is providing for me. He is providing more than I had ever thought I could achieve. And then, you guessed it, the company gave me a ring and they said, we don't need you anymore. And that was about a year ago. And so about that time, I got to the point in my life where I was able to look back. I had 3 years, which was a long time, but it was a time lengthy enough for me to say, look back on all those different times where the company said, we don't care that you're a decent employee. We don't care that you're having a child in 2 weeks. We don't care that you have the needs. See you later. And in those moments, I was not the raised hands of like, this is good. I was the people who put their hands down and said, this is not good. The Lord is not good to me right now. I don't know why this is happening. I don't know what's going on. And it wasn't until that last time where I was able to look backwards and also be able to have the experience, have my wife Liz, who many of you know, to be able to say, God is good. Look back at all those times where you are now, what we have now, how God has provided for us. And it wasn't easy all the time. It wasn't like I got laid off or I got fired and then it was just like sunshine and rainbows. It was really rough. It was like depression and like finances and like houses were like very close to not being ours anymore. But every time God would lead us into his good graces, and he would give us more than we asked for, more than we could have thought possible. And so after that last time of being laid off, and this is going to be life. Life is going to throw you major curveballs. You're going to encounter things in your life that you never thought you would have to. You're going to put your family through things that they never wanted to be put through. And it may not be your fault all the time. Sometimes it could be your fault. I probably could have been a better employee, and maybe like in those moments they would have said like, maybe we'll keep him for a little bit longer. Maybe we'll let him stay till his baby is born. So those things, like, there are things you can do. But in that last moment, in that last time I was laid off from a company, I was able to definitely say, you know what? I'm okay with this because God will provide. He has always provided. He is good. And that is something that I can just be able to say, like, even though I don't know what's going to happen, even though I don't know where the money's going to come in, I can say God is good. He will provide. I'm going to rest in that. And he always does. And I think it comes in different forms. It's not going to always be exactly what you wanted. The jobs that I got after getting laid off weren't always good. They were rough. They were really, really hard. You had to work really hard. I had to work really hard at them. But again, I was able to say, God is good. God will provide. And I think that's something that we should all be thinking about. Even though there's going to be ups and downs, at the end of it all, God is good. He will provide. JJ.
How about now? Hello? Can you hear me now? That's why you guys weren't listening. You couldn't hear me through the mic. That's my fault. All right. Well, thank you, Landon, for that testimony of how God has worked in your life over the years. I hope you guys listen to that and listen to that well, and can appreciate someone who's willing to get up in front of you and be open and honest about how God's worked in their life, because that's, I'm sure, maybe it looked easier for him sharing it up here right now, but those moments in which Landon, lost his job and he's worrying about how to take care of his family, those are no doubt heavy and serious moments in his life. So I hope you guys are really appreciative of both his heart in sharing that, but also appreciative of God allowing his testimony to be shared with you. And so you can see that God's goodness, who he is, that it's not always easy, because that's something that you guys are going to experience for the rest of your life, something we're going to talk about tonight. But before we jump into that too much, I want to remind you guys of what we're doing. We're in our series called Head, Heart, and Hands. All right, so Head, Heart, and Hands. And basically we want to look at different characteristics of God, different traits of God that we can look at and talk about, and how that affects the way we think, how it affects our heart, the way we feel, and how it affects the way what we do, how we live our life. And tonight, as Landon just shared, and as I just said, we're going to be talking about God's goodness. But before we jump into that, how many of you guys have ever heard or met someone who was a goody two-shoes? Anybody know a goody two-shoes? Somebody just pointed at themselves as the goody two-shoes. That's how you know you've got a true goody two-shoes, when they're like, yeah, that's me. That's me. All right, so how many of you guys, raise your hand high if you know a goody two-shoes. Raise your hand nice and high. Some of you don't know. How many of you don't know what goody two-shoes means? Does anybody not know what that means? One, couple of you? Just the meaning of it? Someone who basically, it's like they're overwhelmingly, maybe the word would be well-behaved. They always do the good thing, right? They don't misbehave. So as an example, it would be someone who maybe when they come to Sunday school, they are, sitting in the front, and they always have their Bible, and they raise their hands for all the questions, and when someone around them is talking, they shush them. And when JJ says don't clap, they stop clapping because they actually listen to me and respect me a little bit. Yes, that's right. For those of you who are goody two-shoes, They're out there. I'm just kidding. But yeah, so that's what a goody two-shoes is, right? Someone who is, we tend to think of them as maybe, especially maybe at your age, because I know I did. And this is, again, how you know a goody two-shoes. I would say I was probably a goody two-shoes. Rob, would you agree with that? Sort of, yes. I was a little bit of a goody two-shoes, at least in front of the adults. Maybe not so much when they weren't around, but Rob and I, we don't talk about that. So, all right. The point is, we tend to think of someone who is good, who listens all the time, does all that. It's like, man, you just, it can carry a negative connotation, right? Someone who is like, they're not willing to bend any rules or break any rules. Like, we just kind of have this like stigma about them. They're probably a little bit less fun. Hopefully you guys don't think that way, but they can be a little bit less fun. I know I was a little bit less fun. Still am a little bit less fun. I know, crazy, believe it or not, right? But when we are talking about God's goodness, we are talking about something much, much higher than someone who just does good all the time, right? Now, that is a huge part of it. That's not all there is to it, right? But God's goodness is a part of everything he is, everything he does. And that's something we need to understand, because what we tend to do is when we look at God, we look at God in these portions, right? So like when God is being loving, he's being loving. And when he's being just, he's being just. And when he's judging sin, he's judging sin. And we can't always see that it is loving when he is judging sin. That God is being loving when he's judging sin. That God is being good when he's judging sin. That he is being good when he's merciful. All of these things tie in together, all right? They're not separate, all right? It's not like God has two personalities where he's sometimes that over there or sometimes that over there, all right? So, and the reason I talk about this is because as Landon just shared, and as some of you probably have experienced in your own life, and as I guarantee you will experience this in your own life, is that sometimes you're going to be at a point where it doesn't feel like God is being good to you. You're going to be at a point where it doesn't feel like God's goodness is overflowing. And you're going to ask, and you're going to have to work through that. You're going to have to think through that, okay? So first, we need to define God's goodness, all right, or what goodness is. And to put it simply, it's the perfection of his nature or his moral excellence, right? So it is a part of all of his character. So when God created the world and all of it in it, he saw that it was good. He created it perfectly, right? So the first thing that we need to understand about God's goodness is that it is perfect, right? There is never a moment where God's goodness is less than, all right? So if there's, we tend to look at, and again, if you think about the Old Testament, something that gets asked a lot about is when you read certain passages in the Old Testament, people will read a passage in Joshua and say, how can God be good and say to do this? How can God be good and sacrifice his own son Jesus on the cross? How can God be good and allow my brother or sister to get sick? How can God be good and I have had trouble with my jobs? How can God be good? And then you fill in the blank afterward. So God is never less than good. He means he's good in all that he does. Every single thing. All right? Number 2, God's goodness, excuse me. I don't get to say thanks, Rob, because that's from me. God's goodness, from his goodness, comes all of the extra blessings in life. Right? So James 1, one of the verses you guys will look up tonight, James 1:17 talks about this. It says, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of change. If it is good, it is from God. All right? And the way that looks is if you have an extra thing here in this life, that is a blessing from God. If you have a good friend sitting next to you right now tonight, that is a good gift from God. That is an overflow of God's good character. If you have over and above everything you need, if you get to go home and watch TV or play video games or paint your nails or, I don't know, curl your hair. Maybe you've gotten a Dyson Airwrap, right? That's a thing, right? Am I right? Yeah? Yeah, go JJ. I remembered something, right? I don't know. For guys, it's easy. To me, it's easier. It's like you go home and play 2K or Madden or Fortnite or whatever. And some of you girls play Fortnite. I know there are a couple of you out there, right? Point is, if you have something good that's extra, that is a good gift from God, and that is an overflow. That is an overflow of God's goodness, right? So one of the ways I just experienced that, as Rob shared with you guys, was a trip to Arizona, right? So we went out for a pastor's conference, but then Rob and I were able to stay for a couple extra days for vacation, and we got to do a hike. We got to see Horseshoe Bend, which apparently a lot of you guys do. Who knows what Horseshoe Bend is, at least? A couple of you? It's like a really, really famous spot, right? What about Antelope Canyons? Anybody? Sort of? Yeah? I'll have to, maybe I should have put some pictures up on the screen for you guys so you could see this, right? What about the Grand Canyon? How many of you guys know what the Grand Canyon is? Yeah? If anybody's hand is not up, you're either not listening to me or you're not listening to your geography teacher or something, all right? You all know what the Grand Canyon is, okay? So Rob and I got to stay and see God's wonderful creation. We got to hike. We got to go down into a canyon, and then we got to see the Grand Canyon. Those are all that beauty that we got to experience, that friendship, the time, all of that. That was a good gift that God has allowed us to have. And that is an overflow from his excellence, from his goodness, from his perfect excellence, from his perfect goodness. All right? And thirdly, as you guys will talk about tonight, I'm going to get you guys out of here pretty quick. All right? Thirdly is that God's goodness is not passive. It is not passive. In other words, this isn't something that God uses sometimes and sometimes puts aside. Right? And so, and this kind of ties in directly with how he is perfectly good. Right? So what that means is in his goodness, he pursues you. In his goodness, he pursues the rest of his own character. In his goodness, he is deliberate. One of the things that I read, one of the things that defined this, says God's goodness is persistent resistance of all moral evil and the choosing and following of all moral good. And so the last thing that I want to really say to you guys before you go in and really jump into this deeper with your small groups is that God's goodness is sometimes to us, and I know I said this already, but it doesn't look like goodness to us, does it? If you're real with yourself, you would if you took some time to think about your life, I guarantee you that there would be moments in your life that you would say you felt or thought that God was not being good to you. I know I have. That's not to say that I've had a super hard life. I've had hard things happen. But there have been moments in my life where I could look at you and I could say, yeah, I know God is good, but in my heart or in my mind, I was believing that God was being less than good to me. Sometimes that took an angle where I thought, I am in sin right now, and so God is not being good to me, so I will go back to him. And then when I go back to him, that's when he'll be good to me again. That's when he'll be good again. Or when God, or when, I lose that friend who I really cared about, and they no longer want to be my friend, or they turn their back on me, or they hurt me or betrayed me or whatever. When I lost that friend, God was good to me when they were my friend, but he's being less good to me now because that person that I really cared about, we're not together. We're not friends anymore. We tend to look at God's goodness in this one middle aisle right here where it's like when I'm happy and when everything's going right and when I'm walking with the Lord and close to Jesus, that's when he's going to be good to me. This is it. But if I'm over here sinning, no, God's not going to be good to me. He's just going to judge me and whatever until I come back to him. Or when my life, maybe it's not even sin connected, but when my life gets hard, when I lose my job, when I lose that friend, when I can't go on the missions trip, when when I do poorly at school, so on and so forth, when all of those things are happening, God is not being good to me. God is good to you always from here to here. It's not just when you're right here. God's goodness is a part of his calling you back to him. But we don't always look at it that way because we look at it as what we want. If God gives us what we want, that's goodness. But in reality, God knows what's good. God knows what's best. And sometimes we don't align with that. Sometimes we don't look at it that way. But the really cool thing, and then this is the last thing, the really cool thing is that despite all of that, God is still good. His goodness, despite your misunderstanding it or not wanting to believe it, is still goodness.